first candle is lit in honor of Judaism. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so none like you has ever been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. The second candle is lit in honor of Christianity. Let each one test his own work, and then his reason to boast will be in himself alone and not in his neighbor. The third candle is lit in honor of Hinduism. The Hindu scriptures say that two things are needed for any kind of creative activity: consciousness and energy. Consciousness is worshipped in the form of Shiva, and energy in the form of the Divine Mother Shakti. The initial creative inspiration, the effort to give it form, and the end result, all are seen as being the grace of the divine. The fourth candle is lit in honor of Islam. Allah has granted human beings with the capacity to create and has left it for them to develop. The fifth candle is in honor of Taoism. Give birth to and nourish all things without desiring to possess them. Give of yourself without expecting something in return. Assist people, but do not attempt to control them. This is how to realize the deep virtue of the universe. The sixth candle is lit in honor of Sikhism. Created in God's own image, every human being is created. For life itself has been created as a self-renewal, self-sustaining, creative process. The final candle is lit in honor of Buddhism. All experiences are preceded by mind, having mind as their master, created by mind. Today's reading is from Ernest Holmes' Cause and Effect. When the members of a community love one another, that community is solid, prosperous, and happy. Nations are bound together by common interest and common affections. When the whole world realizes this truth, it will unite in thought and in action. Let's take those words into the silence. So I know this service today is absolutely in divine order. Every word spoken, every note played, every note sung. It is all expressing the truth of God's love. We are centered in that truth, so I know that today is a day of joy, a time of oneness, a time of sharing. And I thank you, God, for this time that we are sharing together. And together we say, and so it is.
Happy Mother's Day. If you're a mom or a mother figure, thank you for giving your love to nurture and teach another. If you have a mom, thank you for your patience in being loved and taught and nurtured in the best way your mom knew how. Motherhood is one of the most complicated relationships on earth. There are lots of moving parts, right? Lots of moving parts. The other day I was at Children's Hospital, which incidentally curiously is where my 74-year-old husband's orthopedic surgeon has his offices. Go figure. So we're at Children's Hospital, which is always a really fun place to be, and there was this little boy named Parker, and somehow he'd fallen like that on his 2 fingers and broken both of them. Didn't slow him down at all. He was tearing around there, and he and I got to be friends and playing this, all these little video screens. So we were playing this video crash and burn game together, and we got to be friends. And Mom was actually really appreciative because she had a toddler too. There were so many moving parts going on in there. It was amazing. And there was another mom there with a really, obviously, very ill child. And the mother was so kind and so patient and so sweet. It just brought me to tears. And then there were several other mothers who had run out of resources. They were not doing a good job that day. They were very, very upset and angry and yelling. And, they just didn't have they didn't have any nerves left to work, so to speak. And I just sat there and thought about this whole paradoxical relationship between mothers and children. All of our relationships with all of our mothers are sort of paradoxical. There's an inherent potential for conflict. Let's put it that way. Because moms care, and their job is to protect their children from harm. And a kid's job is to push the envelope and explore and become. There's an inherent potential for conflict, right? A mother's tendency is to keep the child close, and the kid's tendency is to go as far away as they can get. It's because they're trying to become who they are. There's an inherent potential for conflict all the time. And so as we go through life with our mothers or with our children, we each also bring these learned limitations that we've held onto for a long time, and sometimes this mothering thing gets really difficult and complicated and conflicted, and we grow up with baggage on both sides. Moms have baggage, kids have baggage, and so we walk through life carrying that baggage, and sometimes it's really heavy baggage, and at some point we come to the place we just want to put it down. We just want to put it down. We want to heal whatever's gone on and let it all go. And that's where the philosophy we teach here begins to work its magic, is in that moment of saying, I want to be finished with this, right? I just want to put this down. I believe that the world would be a much healthier, happier place if somehow we all, mothers, fathers, and kids, learned how to walk through conflict, how to handle conflict, how to resolve conflict for our growth, rather than to simply wind up with another piece of baggage to carry around. I think that's another place that our philosophy can do its magic. But in order to have the magic work, we have to come to understand what's created the baggage, what's created the conflicted experiences we've had to date. And that can be kind of unpleasant, because most of the time we don't want to dive into what's not working. We want to stay in the joy and the light and at least the bliss of ignoring the baggage, right? But real healing and real growth and real transformation comes from facing the dysfunctions that we have. We have to know what's there operating below the surface so that we can identify the truth that's really there. We have to face what the psalmist called the valley of the shadow of death before we can see that we're always in the light. We have to be able to explore the poverty of our own spirit in order to break through to the riches that we came with, that are just part of who we are. We have to compassionately understand our own poverty of spirit and mind and body before we can create something new, and certainly before we can help anyone else heal their poverty. We have to understand and begin to heal our own. My Unity colleague, Dr. Gary Simmons, wrote a great little book about this whole thing. It's called The Eye of the Storm. And he identifies in that book what he calls the 4 winds of conflict. and he identifies conflict in a way that I really resonate with. He said, conflict is an interference pattern of energies. Wherever there is change or movement or resistance or pressure or interaction, there's the potential for conflict, right? And there is nothing in life that is without movement and change. So the potential for conflict is always there. It's constant. So do you see then that conflict doesn't come to us, it comes from us. It comes from us. It's the result of two competing intentions. One is the desire to feel safe, and the other is the drive to fulfill our souls. So we always have these two competing energies going on. And, it's kind of like mom on the one hand wants to keep us safe. And our inner self on the other says, I need room to unfold. So there's always this tension between the two. The way Gary Simmons puts it in his book, I dearly love, he says, at all times we are either being the way of God or being in the way of God. It's a great little shorthand way to remember it. We are either unfolding our beauty and our potential, or we are letting our baggage get in the way. So say my husband says something to push my buttons. It happens all the time. Happened just this morning. He didn't even have to say anything. He just did something. Pushed one of my old buttons. And it reminded me of being belittled as a child. Marriage is all about that. It's a great, really, intimate relationships are our greatest fields for growth. So I have these two reactions. I want to let my soul give a little extra love to me and to my husband in that moment. There's a part of me that wants to realize that that's all that's required. And then there's a part of me that wants to push back, wants to get his buttons involved, wants to start a little conflict, because then maybe I can be on top, I can win. I can either be in the way of God or I can be the way of God in those moments. It happens every day, all the time, right? Resistance and challenge and conflict are necessary elements to life. We don't grow without them. If everything is just always, nothing ever changes. But when we have the potential to say, do I want to be the way of God or do I want to be in the way of God, we grow. It's automatic when we stop and ask ourselves that question. Conflict isn't a bad thing at all. It's something to be embraced, but it frightens us. So we run away from it instead. It's conflict. Conflict is conflict because it brings us to the edge of our resources. We think, I'm in a place and I don't have what I need to handle it, which is baloney. We have everything we need to handle it. But it appears to us in that moment, we don't know how to do something or be something that will resolve the situation. So we get scared. We get scared. It's conflict because we don't know how to respond to a perceived threat in a way that makes us feel safe and okay. The well of our resourcefulness seems to have run dry. And we know intellectually that can't be true because the well of resourcefulness is infinite, right? We know that, but emotionally we don't quite trust it, which is one of the ways conflict grows us. It grows our ability to trust that divine which is welling up inside of us, which is the very source of our resourcefulness. So I said a minute ago that because life is always in movement and change and shift, interaction, there is conflict potential all around us all the time. And we're constantly running into that paradoxical moment. I want to feel safe and I want to grow at the same time, right? I want security and I want novelty. I want things to stay the same and I want them to change. It happens all the time. I want to venture into something greater, but I don't know what's going to happen, so I'll just stay back here. How we are feeling about our lives in general and what is the state of our basic physical and mental and spiritual immune system has a great deal to do with how we respond in those moments. If we're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, unprayed up, haven't meditated in 6 months, we're much more likely to experience and personalize the situation as conflict rather than as opportunity. And Gary Simmons calls the things that trigger us the 4 winds of conflict. And his whole metaphor is a storm. So there's 4 winds blowing in here, and he says those conditions are the sense of separation from ourselves and others, a misperception of what's going on, competitiveness, and defensiveness. I don't know about you, but I wasn't raised being told I was a divine child of God. Nor was I treated that way, right? The limitations of our parents didn't let them understand that and convey it to us. So we learned to be separate. We learned to be separate from bad experiences, from others, from ourselves, and from the divine. We learn to separate ourselves from that. And those patterns create a need for life to be a certain way, right? It has to be a certain way for me to feel safe. It has to be a certain way for me to feel okay. We rely inappropriately on what's happening externally to gauge how we are internally, to gauge our own worth and our own wholeness. Separation supports conflict because it keeps us from experiencing that flow of resources that wells up in our deepest self. And we misperceive a lot. We do. Every single one of us does. The Talmud says, we see things not as they are, but as we are. We have these frameworks or structures for seeing and assigning meaning in the world. And those structures limit what we can see. They limit what we can take in. We misperceive what we're looking at, and conflict brings us right to the edge of those structures. And being at the edge is the opportunity to question and say, ooh, I wonder if I squint, if I can see even a little bit more, or maybe I need to get a different perspective and I can see something more from this angle. It's an opportunity to enlarge our ability to see. When what someone else needs or wants gets in the way of what we need or want, we get competitive, right? No, those are my resources and you can't have them. We believe erroneously that if someone else gets some, we won't. The problem with competition is that there's a winner and a loser, right? And the loser is diminished and angry and resentful. And the winner, in the gloating sort of thing that we do with winning, reinforces our inferiority because we're masking the insecurity that drove us to need to win in the first place. Competition comes from forgetting our inherent wholeness. It comes when we forget that we are all one with each other and with the divine. And finally, defensiveness. Defensiveness implies that we see something out there as a threat, right? There's a threat out there or an adversary out there. And so we distance ourselves from it. We distance ourselves from the situation. We distance ourselves, from our own wholeness, from our unlimited resourcefulness. Defensiveness is a practice of the belief that we're separate. So these 4 attitudes, defensiveness and competitiveness and misperception and separation, those are what lie in the way of us being the way of God. Those are the things that push us into being in the way of God. They take the normal rubs and pressures and collisions of life and cause us to push them up a level into conflict. And without those attitudes, we just go, oh, this is happening. I wonder what I can learn here. I wonder how I can expand from this. But with them, we wind up in fights, conflicts, competitions. We wind up being defensive. We wind up pushing back when someone pushes our buttons. And that doesn't ever get us where we want to go. Never has, never will, right? Emma Curtis Hopkins, the teacher of teachers in our movement, said, I will tell you that between you and your good which belongs to you and which you ought to have is your idea of the absence of good. Love that statement. These four attitudes are the things upon which we hang our idea that our good is absent. Our good is absent. So when we can recognize that we're feeling defensive or competitive or separate or clearly misperceiving things, we're not seeing the good that is always present in us and as us. So we sow some more seeds of defensiveness and competitiveness and misperception and separation, and things get worse. However, when we step back and remember that we can't be separate, that there's only good to perceive, that no one else's good shortens our ability to have good, that we don't need to compete. See, we have to admit that we do these things before we can see ourselves doing them and choose differently, right? We all do these things. Every one of us, all the time. They're old habits that were taught by society. And so, these four winds of conflict are interrelated. But perhaps, I know for me, there is one that I feel particularly connected to. Maybe that's true for you too. Maybe if we were to spend the week in observance of how those winds blow in our lives and how we respond to them and what's created as a result, we would learn how not to do them, how not to react to them quite so drastically. Perhaps if we were to spend the week noticing when conflict threatens, and we were to pause and take a breath, we were to pause and ask ourselves, how am I feeling separate here? How am I feeling separate? What am I feeling the need to defend? Where am I feeling competitive? And how might I be misperceiving what's going on? We might be able to say instead, none of that is true. None of that is true. I have enough. I am the way of God. We listen to our souls instead of our minds. We listen to that part of us that wants to rise above the storm and see the truth. And remember, those winds are just blowing through. They're just blowing through. You are the way of God. Each of us is the way of God. The I am that you are is more powerful than any storm.